Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I want to welcome all of you to this session in this online seminar on sustainability, inclusion, assertiveness skills for effective communication. I would like to thank my colleague, Professor Junaid Baba, as well as all of the other administrators at the university for having this session and the opportunity for you and I to interact with each other and hopefully continue our relationship in the months and years to come about research, about collaboration, about helping each other to make this world a little bit better for ourselves and our students in the future. Our agenda today is again on sustainability, inclusion, assertiveness, and the implications of this for communication and effective conflict management. I believe if we look at the Higher Education Commission in Pakistan, they probably want all of us to include some element of sustainability, inclusion, and effective communication for all of our current and future leaders as part of our curriculums that we do teach every single day. One of the main responsibilities of current leaders and managers is to be developmental coaches and to prepare future leaders for the challenges of a modern global economy, which could be very complex and it could vary from day to day. And more specifically, could vary from city to city, from country to country, and from culture to culture. Nonetheless, future leaders must be socialized with effectiveness, with efficiency, and with a sustainability mindset at all times. You all need to remain effective leaders, and that means do the right things at all times. And you must also remain efficient, which means doing the right things in the right way, since you and I, as educators, serve as developers as well as role models for all of our current and future leaders. As you know, we live in an interdependent world, and COVID-19 has certainly proven that we need to think of the globe as one world without any man-made borders being relevant for the well-being of humanity. COVID-19 travels regardless of how often you close your borders. So we need to make this world a better place for everyone, otherwise everyone suffers. Consequently, we need sustainable development goals, or SDGs, and leaders need to govern inclusively with equity for all, because again, if one people group are suffering in one corner of the world from COVID-19, that means everyone is at risk. The Sustainable Development Goals are also known as global goals. They were adopted by the United Nations member states in 2015, and they're a universal call to action to, number one, end poverty, to protect the planet, and to ensure that all people enjoy peace and prosperity. Now, this is by the year 2030, which is a very, very extreme goal to achieve this in such a short time. But if we don't achieve it by 2030, many people will continue to suffer in the years to come or for much longer, and people do not need to suffer. So I think it's a great goal to end poverty as quickly as we can. So the 17 integrated SDGs are basically solving the world's toughest challenges over the next few years. It is really a good goal to have zero poverty, to have zero hunger. You believe in that, I believe in that, all of our colleagues would certainly agree with that. Through the pledge of leaving no one behind, countries should commit to a very fast-track progress for the poorest or most disadvantaged first. These SDGs are designed to bring the world to several life-changing zeros, like zero poverty, zero hunger, zero AIDS, and zero discrimination against women and girls or any other minority group. Everyone is needed to reach these ambitious targets as quickly as possible, especially you and I as educators and developers, as well as our students who are going to be running our cities, our states, our countries in the years to come. So the creativity, the know-how, the technology, and financial resources from all of society is necessary to achieve the goals in every context. The collective role of all stakeholders should include a common understanding of the ethical base for the new social order, for the long-term interest of everyone to be accomplished through appropriate goals, or SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. The SDGs agenda for 2030 does include three interdependent dimensions of sustainable social, economic, and environmental developments. The social is probably the most ignored one or the least talked about issue. Societal problems tend to arise and cause sustained conflicts when too many people choose to become greedy or follow their own individual profit maximization motives for their own immediate satisfaction rather than trying to work for the long-term interest and goals of the community in general. Social problems deal with issues within the society, and they make it difficult for people to achieve their full potential, especially those who are not as wealthy as their colleagues in the city or state or in the country. Poverty, unemployment, unequal opportunities, gender issues, ethnic issues of inequity, and malnutrition are all examples of social problems, not to mention substandard housing, employment discrimination, child abuse, and neglect that unfortunately many are suffering around the world. So there are many issues that are considered to be social. Think about the bullying that goes on in schools, the obesity, the academic problems, the social media issues that we need to protect our children from, and also drug abuse that seems to be rampant throughout the world. So there are many issues that our children are suffering from, and we need to protect them. These are all social concerns. About 800 million people live in extreme poverty and suffer from hunger every single day. Unfortunately, in today's environment, we notice that about 5 to 10 million Afghans are falling into this category, in addition to the previous poverty that existed in the country. So we need to do more locally, nationally, regionally, and internationally to remove hunger and bring about that zero hunger, zero poverty in the globe by 2030, if not before. For this to happen, we need good governance. Good governance must consist of transparency, accountability, inclusion, equity, responsiveness, good management, as well as good leadership in stakeholder engagement to make sustainable social, economic, and environmental policies that are good for everyone. When it comes to environmental issues, I would like to define sustainability as the ability of the organization to effectively as well as efficiently manage their core economic responsibilities while also proactively respecting the environment and being accountable to their stakeholders in a very transparent manner. Sustainable decision making requires all of us to focus on having a very efficient process that eliminates waste in the production process. During COVID, we've seen supply chain challenges. Unfortunately, many people are not able to get all the products they need to satisfy consumers. So efficiency becomes even more important during crisis periods or pandemic times. In the US alone, we see that over 2.5 million plastic bottles are thrown away every single hour. Imagine how many that is in 24 hours, and imagine how many that is for the whole planet. Every year, Americans generate over 243 million tons of waste, which unfortunately ends up being thrown into the grounds. In other words, some of this material would poison our waters and the planet in general. Every year, between 30 to 40% of the food that is produced worldwide is wasted, when in fact, millions of people are going hungry every single night because they don't have enough food. 1.2 to 2 billion metric tons of food is wasted every single year. Waste is unfortunately entering our rivers, groundwater, and oceans, and thereby poisoning the available resources that you and I consume on a regular basis. Stormwater drains capture rainwater on roads and move it into canals and eventually into bigger rivers and to the ocean, which basically means that things like antifreeze, gasoline, and any other toxins from your cars go into your neighborhoods and to the ocean, into the rivers, which eventually impacts us all. Think about water scarcity, which affects 40% of the people in the world and is projected to increase. People in Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iran, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan are all dealing with this in real time. Think about the border between India and Pakistan and how much each country is concerned about the water for the years to come for the populations. So we're using about 25% more natural resources than our planet can sustain, which means we need to be more sustainable and very careful in terms of how much waste we generate. Global emissions in carbon dioxide have increased over 50% just over the past 2 decades. We can prevent the worsening impact of climate change by reducing it, by combating it, by stopping it, and by adapting on a situation-to-situation basis and on a city-to-city basis. So each culture might have to take different steps to mitigate the worsening impact of climate change. However, we can all start by focusing on sustainability in everything we do. The way forward is that we need to educate our students, our consumers in the workforce on the necessity and benefits associated with sustainable production, operation, and decision making in everything we do. I like the Native American proverb or statement that says that only when the last tree has died and the last river been poisoned and the last fish been caught will we realize we cannot eat money. Investments in having a big bank account only goes so far. We need to keep our environment clean and green, not just for the good health of ourselves and our colleagues, but for our future generations. Ambassador Domenico of Italy years ago in Lahore conference mentioned that it is a moral obligation to protect the future of our children. We need to think creatively to develop green standards in every city, every country. We need to act locally in order to solve global challenges. We need to think sustainably by reusing, by reducing, by recycling, by renewing, and respecting the environment and everything we do. When it comes to economic issues, we need to go beyond equality towards equity for all, which can be more sustainable in society. Equity is different than equality. We need to implement equitable goals and policies in an inclusive manner for all diverse groups. As Dr. Paul Hersey and Ken Blanchard mentions, effective and equitable leadership is adapting your behavior to the performance needs of the person being influenced. So this person can be an employee, a boss, a child, a parent, a community member, or somebody sitting across from you right now in this conference. I believe in the 3L model of leadership. Anytime I go onto a new project or a new department or a new organization, people sometimes ask me, what is your view of leadership? I often emphasize that I would first like to listen. Second, learn the facts of the situation, the department, from all stakeholders, and then lead. So listen, learn, and then lead, thereby the 3L model of leadership. The Japanese proverb states that if you understand everything, you must be misinformed. As researchers, we know there's a vast, vast universe, and we cannot possibly know everything. Therefore, we need each other. We need everybody to work through complex problems, through synergy, through teamwork, through hearing different points of views. In other words, everyone's view perspectives must be included. Robert Reich, the former labor secretary in the United States, said that I am glad the university is being careful during COVID-19 pandemic. But I've got to tell you, I hate the idea of teaching remotely. Teaching students through the lens of my laptop is like teaching a wall or an empty chair. While many of us can relate to this, teaching remotely is not necessarily exactly the same as teaching face-to-face or being in the classroom where you can see students eye to eye in real time and have a good back and forth collaboration to extend research knowledge and maybe some policies for effective governance. So many of us are right now facing this challenge. Do we speak up or do we just do what is available? Well, There has to be a balance of the two. I think the more we collaborate, the more we come up with better solutions in today's complex environment. We need to be involved in doing. As Confucius' proverb states, what I hear, I forget. What I see, I remember. However, what I do, I understand. So we need to talk about what might be the best policy. We need to see it in action, and we need to do it. In other words, we need to be role models of what we preach and what we say in order for others to quickly observe, imitate, and duplicate this throughout society. In today's environment, we're going to have different points of views between brothers, between sisters, between children and parents, and definitely between coworkers, as well as those who are citizens and their political leaders. When we do have different points of views, we need to resolve those challenges before it becomes a massive conflict. So the conflict resolution guide that I recommend is called the 4F model. In other words, focus on facts that are stated or that is obvious for everyone. Share your feelings about how something made you feel, future expectations, and then follow up if you're a manager. So if somebody makes inappropriate statements or condescending statements toward you, toward your family, toward your colleagues or department, or toward your gender, for example, you let them know that that is not inappropriate statement because it makes you feel angry, disappointed, since it's not a factual statement. Therefore, ask them to avoid it in the future. And hopefully they avoid it. Otherwise, the managers can follow up and reprimand the person in order to create a more healthy and more collaborative environment that is good for learning, good for collaboration, and good for collegiality. Albert Einstein mentioned that the significant problems we face cannot be solved at the same level of thinking we were at when we created them. Thereby, we need to have a different paradigm shift in order to deal with the root cause of the problem. So sometimes we need to change our paradigms through new knowledge and different forms of education to get ourselves out of the problems we behaved ourselves into. In other words, we need to have like a general education program or multidimensional views of different subjects in order to solve today's complex problems. We also need to think about sustainable governance or ethics. Ethics is basically the principal conduct of governing an individual or a group. It is the standards you use to decide what your conduct should be in any given environment. Obviously, the context of the culture makes a big difference in terms of what we decide. When it comes to governance and sustainability, local, national, and international forms of corruption must be eliminated because they're not contributing to the well-being of the local society or local entrepreneurs. Keep in mind, if we allow corruption to keep going, the bigger corporations and the multinational foreign corporations have much more funding. So they can obviously corrupt and bribe more people compared to those small business entrepreneurs in the local community. We need to rely on those small business entrepreneurs to keep the economy going. Thereby, we need to have a corruption-free environment for them. We must say no to any form of dishonesty, bribery, or corruption. The best weapon to fight corruption is a pen or a pencil with a book through continuous education in learning for everyone. President Ronald Reagan once mentioned that the government's first duty is to protect the people, not run their lives. Well, the government should be protecting every citizen, should include every citizen in the policies for effective governance. According to the United Nations, today it would be implausible for any global company to exclude sustainability from its agenda. The government needs to encourage all educators to include sustainability and inclusion as part of their curriculums, especially in business fields and leadership education. An effective modern leader is one who can be more than just a capitalist by being a social entrepreneur who can benefit others through his or her innovation, through creativity and efforts in a socially responsible manner. Greed is not sustainable. We need to make socially responsible decisions in everything we do. Is there equity in the global distribution of COVID-19 vaccination in today's environment? Well, you know we live in an interdependent world. When one person or one country is not protected, that means every country, every individual throughout the planet is at risk of getting the coronavirus. So we need to provide vaccinations for everyone throughout the planet, whether poor or rich, everyone deserves the vaccination in a good, healthy work environment. Prevention is always better than asking for forgiveness. Instead of having more zeros in the bank accounts of those 3,000 or so billionaires that exist in our world, we need to be more socially responsible and distribute the wealth for the poorest into the poorest countries so they can deal with this pandemic more effectively. Thereby, all of us will be better off in the years to come. We need to continuously be involved in good deeds, as the concept of ihsan has always encouraged us. We need to have a spiritual relationship with God or something above and beyond us. We need to purify our intentions. We need to perfect our moral character every single day. In other words, we need to be better than we were yesterday. We need to avoid wrongs. We need to continue doing good deeds. Ethical development requires clarity, training, exercise, and consistency of going in the right direction every single day. It is a skill that you develop over time. So what is the best vitamin for an ethical person? That's a question I ask oftentimes in corporate training workshops. Well, it is B1. You say, why B1? Because this is the only solution to be an ethical person. So B1, be an ethical person. This is the only way we can extend our behaviors and expectations to thousands of others by being role models. Let us do an exercise with your index finger. I would like to take your index finger and place it carefully on your chin. Look around the class, look around your colleagues now. Where do they have their fingers on? Chances are most of you have it where I have it, which is my cheek. This would be chin. This is cheek. My direction was to place your finger on your chin. The reason some of you have it on your cheek is because I put it on my cheek. And I'm the role model here. People do what you do. So make sure your words and actions are the same and consistent. As Goethe, the German philosopher, once mentioned, knowing is not enough, we must apply. And Bruce Lee popularized this in his movies. And also willingness or motivation is not sufficient. We must actually do. Do what you expect of others, because people are likely to follow the actions that they observe of their respected leaders. You and I, as educators, need to be ethical role models at all times. Go beyond ethics and diversity towards inclusion, because exclusion is not the solution. An inclusive culture exists where members can be very diverse or heterogeneous, and together they create a distinctive competitive advantage through teamwork and unique cultural knowledge for their departments, for their organizations, and for their countries. Exclusion is not the solution. Segregation is not the solution. Integration is not the solution. We must move toward inclusion of all diverse groups, both genders, young and old, people of different languages, ethnic backgrounds must come together throughout the world to deal with the complex challenges we face in today's environment. Inclusion is the only way forward to be equitable for all. An inclusive learning environment is where all students and participants are actively involved in the learning process, and they can actually fully relate to the concept being presented from multi-dimensionality perspective or different points of views. Why is it that sometimes in politics we only have one female surrounded by 30 different men? We need to have equal number of men and women, because if you look at the overall ratios, chances are it's going to be 50% in most countries and cultures of men and women. So we need to have the same representation in all decision-making positions, especially in politics, because they represent all of us, not just men. Also, don't feel like a diamond in the dirt. If you have valuable thoughts, make sure it gets heard. Make sure you don't leave any discussion or any meeting without being fully heard. This is where the concept of assertiveness comes in. Assertiveness is the ability to express your feelings, your thoughts, your beliefs, and your opinions openly in a way that respects those of others. So how can we be more assertive in today's work environment, personally and professionally? Well, learning to be assertive is a skill. It requires listening. It requires exercising it. Just like you play soccer or you coach somebody, you get better and better over time. So the more skill you have, the less likely you'll be to feel like a fish out of the water. Author Vicky Corral provides many suggestions, and more specifically, certain phrases that you can use on a day-to-day basis to be a little bit more assertive with your colleagues in the workplace. She says that assertiveness can help increase your confidence and decrease your stress. It can also be used at home or at work. And also be very careful of using qualifiers such as the word but. Is that okay? Because these qualifiers actually decrease the importance of your opinion. To be more assertive, you can learn to say no. Saying no sets some limits on other people's demands of your time, especially when their demands conflict with your own personal needs. You can acknowledge the other person's request by repeating it back to them and explain your reason for declining, and then say no. If appropriate, you can always suggest some alternative proposal where both of your needs will be met simultaneously. So assertiveness contributes to your personal success as well as your professional success in the workplace, and it helps fulfill your career and life ambitions. There's a concept of graceful assertiveness, which is about creating a very comfortable environment for discussing difficult concerns in a collaborative manner, while also focusing on the issue, not the people, as it is not about changing the other person or persons in your department. Graceful assertiveness is about telling the truth with compassion at the right time and in the right manner. Graceful assertiveness is about speaking without putting the other person in a defensive position. Author and motivational speaker Dennis Waitley says the reason most people never reach their goal is that they don't define it. They don't learn about them. They even don't seriously consider them as believable or achievable. Winners can tell you where they're going, what they plan to do along the way, and who will be sharing the adventure with them. So be clear about how you can be an inclusive and sustainable educator or leader at your department and at your university, in your city, in the environment. Effective communication is sharing information with others carefully, assertively, and attentively in such a way that they understand what you are saying. The fact is that science helps us understand what our growth goes through. When a Chinese bamboo tree is planted and watered efficiently and regularly, its growth is all underground during the first 4 years. But in its 5th and 6th year, it can grow to a height of 90 feet in just about 5 to 6 weeks. If education is the bamboo tree growing inside of you, keep nourishing it with a strong faith that progressive development is occurring, even if you cannot see it in yourself or in your students. Keep emphasizing the good practices eventually your students will rise up to the challenge and solve today's complex problems. Thank you for allowing me this opportunity to share my thoughts with you about sustainability, inclusion, and effective communication for leadership and for good education. Keep in mind that the only way to predict the future is to have the power to shape the future. If people don't listen to you or they ignore you, they don't include you in decisions, you need to speak up assertively. In a way, you're changing the future by changing your own behavior and demanding more respectfully. Together, let us all take care of Mother Earth by being sustainable in everything we do. We can reduce, we can reuse, recycle, renew, and respect the environment. And we can do this through inclusion, through effective communication in a sustainable manner. Luckily, you and I have the opportunity to influence hundreds and sometimes thousands of young students' minds to become better leaders in order that they make this world a little bit better for you and I and the rest of the world in the years to come. Good luck being an inclusive, sustainable educator in your department and your city and in your planet. Good luck.
Okay, the question is what is the difference between the willpower and the skill power?
Oh,
Can you
okay,
elaborate?
Okay, I understand. Willpower and skill power. Well, I think the willpower has always been with us, right? Because we say, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has willed this for you, you can get it done. And I think there's a lot of truth to that from a psychological perspective. So that gives us the motivation. But just because we're motivated does not mean we always have the skill. I think today's problems and challenges are much more complex than just jumping into something with just willpower. So I like the terminology of willpower and skill power, very, very good. But I think the second part has to be instilled in us. It's sort of like you and I go to school for 12 years, and then we do 5 more years of college, and then we do a master's degree, then we do doctoral degree. That is all skill power, right? But we couldn't do this, couldn't gain the skill power without the willpower to go to school for all those years. So I think the two go together. The motivation is important, but you cannot get the job done without the skill. And I think this is where Goethe, the German philosopher, was also mentioning that knowledge is not enough, you must actually do, or motivation is not enough, we must actually apply. I think I understand the question is basically about cultural differences, right? That the local situations might vary quite a bit from place to place. That's true. I do agree with that concept. Situations do vary. However, there are some commonalities between countries. So for example, during the last week, I see the news that in Pakistan, there's going to be a female justice in the Supreme Court, right? So that's the first time a female is being nominated to be in one of the highest courts. Now we're having the same discussion here in the US. So in this case, it's a Black female that is being nominated for the first time in the US Supreme Court. So there are some similarities when it comes to exclusion and inclusion, but I do agree that there are going to be major circumstantial differences between what happens in a city here in South Florida, for example, in Miami or Fort Lauderdale, versus what happens in Peshawar. So we need to take the local differences into consideration before making decisions. That is very, very true, and it should be acknowledged. And I think with assertiveness, one of the slides that I have, I always say that it is culture specific. What is considered to be respectful in the US would not be respectful in Pakistan, and what is considered to be respectful may not always be respectful here in the US. So I think that needs to be considered. Very good point. Thank you for mentioning that.
Okay, the question is, the sir is asking about here the main problem is with the teacher perception. The main focus of the teacher perception here in the main stress is the subject. not the overall change of the society. Any alternative approaches, any suggestion regarding that?
Okay,
Especially
yes,
for Pakistan.
certainly, yeah. I think the way we're brought up in Pakistan versus US would be a little bit different the way we're educated. But I think for the most part, the education system that I saw in Pakistan and Afghanistan, in some respect, is superior compared to our children being brought up here in the US. So if we compare, let's say, two students graduating from 12th grade, the mathematics skills and the science skills in Pakistan would be much higher compared to the average student here in the US because of the system differences or the cultural differences. So I think the American society is not as competitive when it comes to education. However, the American society also encourages developed students to be more creative, right? So compared to our system in South Asia, I think there are some areas where our educators have to adapt and change and adopt a new paradigm. And that basically means our goal should be not just to impart knowledge, but impart knowledge in such a way where it is retained and applied on a consistent basis in society. So as educators, we are not necessarily always applying, but we can do this by extending our knowledge and motivating our students to be passionate about what they actually are studying, applying that. So I noticed, I know in Islamabad and Lahore with ComSats and also Superior University, many of their projects in the undergraduate and master's programs require students to choose a project in the community and then make a difference during the 2 months to 4 months on a specific project. But that requires a huge amount of resources for faculty. We cannot have faculty members teaching 12 courses a year and still conduct research and then advise students and have office hours for other issues, committee work and things like that. That is too much responsibility on the faculty. So, but I think if we can balance the course load with research expectations and then provide more teaching assistance to faculty, faculty would be a little bit more creative and they'll have more leeway in terms of adopting new perspectives and also experimenting in the classroom in terms of what teaching styles would be more effective in raising the bar for their students. I know the workload and teaching load is high on my colleagues in Pakistan based on what I've heard. So it's maybe more assistance for the faculty would be needed in order for them to think creatively, attend international conferences, present their research, and also take some of the students to these international conferences to present their research. And hopefully that will bring a new era of competitiveness with global education or the top universities in the world.
Sir, my question is, USA is a developed country and Pakistan is developing. The approaches which you discussed in your presentation, how can we implement sustainability, assertiveness in Pakistan? Pakistan is a developing country in education as well in other fields. How can we understand the people through these approaches that you have discussed in your presentation?
Okay, very good question. Thank you very much, Professor, for that point of view. This is where I think some of the material that I presented in a textbook talks about the developing economies providing more funding to the United Nations. And the United Nations should be providing more funding to developing economies like Pakistan, like Afghanistan, and the rest of the world. Because developing economies like Pakistan, Afghanistan, for example, do not pollute the environment the same rate as we do here in the US. So the responsibility falls on the developed economies to provide more funding. And also the responsibility falls on researchers like yourself and all the faculty in Pakistan to propose to the United Nations that you need some grants to take more sustainable initiatives to end poverty, to provide more equity, and things like that. So hopefully United Nations can provide more funding. And I believe during the last 7 years that I've been involved with Sustainable Development Goals, that is the goal of United Nations. Because if you look at even a country like India, which is very, very big, with a huge population, they don't pollute the environment as much as the Canadians, the Americans, or the British, or the Italians do. So much of the consumption is in the developed economy. Therefore, much of the burden in terms of funding should be on the shoulders of the developed economy in order to reduce pollution in developing countries like Pakistan and others. So, but I think when we're, let's say, looking at heat or energy in Pakistan, we're using more natural resources there compared to the US or compared to the Japanese economy or Europeans. So that is the rationale that I've heard from many experts, that much of the burden should be on the shoulders of the developed economies to provide funding. And then the rest of it is all day-to-day, obviously, when it comes to decisions. Another example of sustainability is, again, bringing everybody in Pakistan together, hearing the voices of everyone. So inclusion. Without inclusion of different diverse groups in Pakistan, those minority groups would be feeling isolated. They would be feeling excluded. So Pakistan, again, a huge country with 200 million people population, or plus minus, you have so much diversity to where inclusion is almost a necessity in order for that governance policies to be sustainable. So, but if we're only making decisions for one or two major groups, that would eventually run into problems because people would not tolerate it for too long. So inclusion, sustainability are important, I think, in the Asian society, especially in Pakistan, just because of the huge impact you all have in the country and also in the neighborhood.
Sir, my question is that as we can see that Pakistan is now going to compete the nations, but yet it is not in this stage to compete the international level students. Like if we are considering our education system, my question is about our education system and about our students. How a teacher can do to nurture the mind of students, to enhance the mental skills of students, so that they may think about an events or any problem multidimensionally instead of just considering one dimension.
Okay, so what can teachers do to focus on the students' mindset of multidimensionality as opposed to just one dimension? Okay, that's a very difficult question, I think, to reflect on. I know I've been in the Higher Education Commission in Lahore there, where faculty from all over Pakistan would come together, and the goal was, what can we do to change the curriculum for engineering, for business, for medicine overall? My experience is that in South Asia, we tend to focus on one area. So I think we have that German philosophy of focusing on one thing in high school, maybe college, and then university, and then master's program and doctoral degree, all in the same functional area. The American view has been a little bit different, to have a well-rounded student in the college years. So the first 2 years of college or university years, Gen Ed or general education classes, which sort of gets students to think about different dimensions in terms of their education. And then the last 2 years of college education is really your professional area, engineering or teaching or finance or marketing or accounting. And then after the 4 years or 5 years of university, then you go into medicine, you go to law, or you go into whatever other professional area. So I think that in South Asia, we don't have the resources to provide the Gen Ed. That's been a challenge, but I think we need to move in that direction to include more general education classes as part of the curriculum. In culture is another element. Generally speaking, I believe in South Asia, we all encourage people to become engineers and become doctors, right? So our students are going into college with the focus of just those two fields being important. So as parents, we need to encourage people to follow their passion. And the more we have the flexibility of students following their passion, the more jobs that we can bring to South Asia, whether it's in terms of theater, music, poetry, literature, or other fields, then our students will have more choices. But traditionally, I think culture prevents the multidimensionality focus for our students, because the jobs have traditionally been in engineering and medicine. But the more we can bring in foreign direct investment, the more we can interact with the international community, I think the more jobs will be available in Pakistan, and that would hopefully in the long term provide this multidimensionality perspective.
I have just one question. Can you just elaborate the impact of technology in assertiveness and sustainability?
Okay, so technology, actually, I did have some slides that technology being one of those variables that is determining the competitiveness of any organization nowadays. So if you look at the last 2 years, my university, the first semester, we converted all classes to online using technology. Many professors were against it because they always love to teach face-to-face. But those of us who were teaching online, we basically adapted more easily, right? But those faculty who were not teaching online, they preferred face-to-face. It was more of a challenge for them. But they adapted to technology and the classes continued. So we never closed the university during the COVID-19 pandemic. So technology can be used in this way, and therefore our university did not suffer. So it is more sustainable in that regard if we use technology effectively. And the other element of technology here in the US is nowadays an organization can hire a person from Pakistan, from India, from Vietnam, from anywhere in the world by working remotely. So far, most American companies are hiring Americans because of the visa problem being a challenge and compensation to foreign nationals being an issue. But I think that will go away eventually. So an American corporation here in New York or here in Florida would be able to hire somebody from Peshawar. As long as you can get the job done through technology, why you need to move to US? There's no need, but you can get obviously the American salary, the benefits. So I think we're moving in that direction from a global point of view. Eventually, technology will make our lives easier and more sustainable to where you can recruit the best talent anywhere in the world. Most American companies right now are having a very difficult time finding employees. So they've changed their systems. Instead of coming to the office, most companies are now transitioning to remote employees. So I know a lot of companies here in South Florida have hired people who are living in California, who are living in New York, who are living in other parts of the US, but they don't come to Florida simply because they can get all their work done remotely. So technology, a very good competitive tool for organizations to use. And if you don't use it properly with remote professionals or professionals working remotely, you'll be at a disadvantage, I think.
Sir, this is our principal C.C.S, our respectable sir, whose support is always with us, and this is your kindness. So I would like to have interaction with you, with my principal C.C.S, sir.
Thank you very much. It's great to have him here and his support for this seminar. Thank you very much for allowing us to have this event.
Dr. Bahaudin, good evening from Pakistan.
Good evening.
I have very different feelings, but allow me to spend some time in order to share my views with you. First of all, I am in gratitude, deeply grateful for the reason that you have taken the first step to make my idea of diversity and collaboration bringing into a reality where today we are connected in different parts of the world just for the purpose of education. Dr. Bahaudin, I may not be a very expert on education, but what I have seen in other parts of the world, I do realize when I came first time in this profession, to me, education was not competitive. It was rather collaborative. And to bring that collaboration in reality, today the world is indeed a global village. You sitting in the western part of the world talking to us, where we right now are in an area of Pakistan which is called extremely remote, subjected to intense conflicts. It's Waziristan. But listening you very carefully was very, very beneficial and rewarding in terms of making our own direction very rightly what we want to achieve. Sir, let me thank you on behalf of my faculty for a very rewarding session on this. And let me request you that it should not be the first and the last session that we have with you. I would request whenever you find time to enlighten us with your ideas, because that gets along a very important subject that we must deal. To me, education is the most important component of our society. Why I say this? To me, the people sitting here listening to us are engineers, because they are the architect of generation, playing with human minds. They are doctors because they mentor brain. They play with the feelings of our youth. They have very important role. But I agree with you that it's the difference of perception. It is the difference of understanding, because in the West, the people related to education are way different, way valued, not like us. In the eastern part, and especially Pakistan, well, I do not blame people, as we just spoke about multi-dimensionality, because the people cannot play it here. We have economic, social insecurities. The parents who see their kid, they immediately make a perception to make him an engineer or a doctor or a military officer. Well, there is a time that we must understand that we are supposed to inculcate values instead of making them machines. C.C.S today has evolved itself into this very idea of inculcating values in order to make them productive components of our society. May it be engineer, doctor, or a military officer. And we are well geared up for this. I do agree with your advice of being ethical, more assertive through our behavior. It's very important. Allow me to share my idea with you that the teachers, the faculty that we have, unless we adopt and we are willing to have these values, only then we'll be able to dispense them to our students. We together play a very important role in shaping our society, making them ready. In my comment, allow me to also invite your thought about the situation that we are going through. Number one, COVID had a very different, difficult, and diverse impact on our global systems, especially education. And you would be aware of the fact that in Pakistan, or maybe this part of the world, it has impacted more severely. And with lack of resources, the recovery that we see in the West, well, it is way slow here in Pakistan. Please do advise us that how the developing or the developed nations in the West have been able to recover the impact of COVID on education system. Because you can see that the technology is not the only solution. We have other sensitivities, insecurities, economic challenges, then also show social impact. In this part of the world, COVID is not taken as global pandemic, especially in our area. So we would look forward to have more interaction with you in future, getting more guidance from you in terms of shaping our response to train and teach our students in a much better way, keeping them more aware of the advanced technology, advanced concepts of education, and more advanced outlook, to give them confidence in order to to reach out whatever they dream of. I'm not in favor of very orthodox approach. I'm always in favor of a very diversified approach in order to make it happen. We have potentials, we have capabilities. The only thing that I foresee we lack is direction. And my team here is well poised, definitely with your support and with your team effort. If we can team up, we will be able to make it happen in this part of the world. I once again, I'm really grateful for your time and a very wonderful presentation and a very rewarding session that we had. We wish you all the best from Pakistan. Definitely, we would request you to be our ambassador, conveying our feeling, our efforts to bring about a very global dream of education for all. I am once again a very strong ambassador of this idea that education is not competition, it is collaboration. I thank you, sir.
Thank you so much. It's good to have all of you in this forum. Thank you all for giving up your evening to be part of this forum. Hopefully we can, I can hear more of the comments later on in the future. But you have my email address, so everybody can comment on the email or send me research papers. I'll be happy to co-author anything that I can from international point of view here. Thank you so much, everybody. Allah Hafiz, and stay safe. I see trees of green, red roses too. I see them bloom for me and you. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world. I see skies of blue and clouds of white, the bright blessed day, the dark sacred night. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world. The colors of the rainbow, so pretty in the sky, are also on the faces of people going by. I see friends shaking hands, saying, how do you do? They're really saying, I love you. I hear babies crying, I watch them grow. They'll learn much more than I'll never know. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world. Yeah, I think to myself,